and welcome. You're watching Race to Power. My name is Mohammed Saleh, and on the show today, South Korea's Constitutional Court has upheld Yoon Suk Yeol's impeachment, sparking a wave of mixed reactions across the country. And in the United States of America, Pentagon will now be investigating the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth for using the Signal messaging app to discuss sensitive information about military operations. Bear in mind, Pete Hegseth is the head of the Pentagon. But let's of course start with what is happening in South Korea. It's been nothing less than a historic day in South Korea's politics. The speculation around the ousted President Yoon's future has now been put to rest. In what was a unanimous decision, South Korea's Constitutional Court has upheld Yoon Suk Yeol's impeachment.
The benefit gained by dismissing the respondent overwhelmingly outweighs the national losses resulting from the president's impeachment. Therefore, I issue the ruling with a unanimous opinion. Because this is an impeachment case, I will confirm the time of the verdict. It is 11:22 a.m. Order. Respondent President Yoon Suk Yeol is impeached.
Now, thousands eagerly were waiting on the streets of Seoul. They broke into tears, applause and celebrations as soon as they heard the verdict. Now, the Constitutional Court ruled that Yoon's declaration of martial law on the 3rd of December last year violated the country's constitution as it obstructed the National Assembly's authority. The court further said that Yoon did not merely declare martial law, but actually went on to commit acts that violated the constitution and the law. Now, soon after the ruling, Yoon Suk Yeol apologized. The impeached president expressed his regret and heartbreak for failing to meet the expectations. Now, the opposition also welcomed the verdict, saying that it is the people who have reclaimed the country.
All of us in the political sphere, including myself, must reflect deeply and feel the weight of this responsibility. I will do my best to ensure that the tragedy of violating the Constitution is never repeated and that politics becomes a source of hope for the people and the nation.
Now, the law states that elections need to be held within 60 days. The authorities have lowered the presidential flag at the office of the president, signaling a new chapter in South Korea's political landscape. And amidst heightened security, officials will also be taking down the portraits of Yoon to be shredded or to be burned. Now, according to law, the court's decision has now set in motion a critical presidential race that is expected to be held by June.
South Korea's President Yoon Suk Yeol was removed from office Friday by the Constitutional Court. The decision sets up a presidential election within 2 months, probably in early June. The frontrunner is Yoon's arch-rival, liberal opposition leader Lee Jae-myung. Yoon was impeached for his actions on December 3rd when he imposed martial law, something that hadn't been done in South Korea since the 1980s when the country was ruled by military strongmen. Yoon says the actions were necessary because the liberal opposition, which controls parliament, were blocking his efforts to stop North Korean and Chinese interference in South Korean democracy. Opponents say he was trying to deflect attention from corruption investigations into his wife and him. South Korea is deeply divided between liberals and conservatives, and that split is likely to get worse as presidential election campaigning heats up.
And the reactions of the South Korean people, of course, were mixed. They poured on to the people after the court's verdict on Yoon's impeachment. Listen in.
I started crying at the beginning of the sentence, and then I started crying a lot.
As a citizen, I cannot accept today's ruling. They ruled 8.0 unanimously against Yoon. And the reason many people here did not expect such result was that the trial proceeded hastily. The president's right to defense was not properly guaranteed.
Yeah, I'm very happy. It's because the impeachment passed, but the judges said everything about what people want. That's what we have installed. So I'm so proud of our country the Constitution. I'm very, very proud of.
With today's verdict, freedom in South Korea is dead once again. This is what I think.
계엄 사태로 인해서
I know that the state of martial law caused a lot of economic and cultural damage. So in that regard, I think it is fortunate that the impeachment was upheld. However, it is unfortunate that during such a politically chaotic time in South Korea, this development might add further chaos.
정치적으로 되게 혼란스러운 시기에
While the world braces for the impact of Donald Trump's tariff war, there are issues that are brewing within the U.S. administration. The White House has fired several top National Security Council officials. The latest sacking spree has given more fire to reports of internal infighting within factions of Donald Trump's team. The development came a day after Laura Loomer, who happens to be a far-right activist, met with President Donald Trump. And according to multiple reports in the U.S. media, Laura Loomer laid out her concerns about the loyalty of some of the NSC officials. Now, herself a bit of a controversial public figure, Laura Loomer is known for claiming that the 9/11 terror attack on the United States of America was actually an inside job. The New York Times reported that 6 people from the NSC were sacked after Laura Loomer's meeting, including 3 senior officials on the body which advises the president on top foreign policy matters. When asked about the reported firings, Donald Trump described Laura Loomer as a great patriot who makes recommendations on the things and people, adding that he sometimes listens to these recommendations. But Trump further added that she was not at all involved with the reported firings.
What did she recommend?
She recommended certain people for jobs.
Adding to the administration, not
adding.
Who did she recommend?
Firing? Well, she'll recommend that too. But yesterday she recommended some people for jobs.
Did she have anything to do with the NSC aides who were ousted?
No, not at all.
Do you know how many, sir? Do you know how many from the NSC?
Not many.
Was it 5, a dozen?
I really don't know.
Now, according to the Washington Post, General Timothy Hoare has been fired as the National Security Agency's director and a U.S. Cyber Command chief. The reports further said that a civilian deputy, Wendy Noble, was also fired. Now, Laura Loomer seemed to confirm the sacking, saying that Hoff and Noble had been disloyal to President Trump, and that is why they had been fired. Now, earlier, Loomer, in fact, said on X that out of respect for President Trump and the privacy of the Oval Office, she was not divulging any details whatsoever. Now, the activist later said that she had presented opposition research to the president. Now, another report claimed that the report quoting an official said that the firings were targeted against such officials who are not totally aligned to Donald Trump's America First policy. Now, it is claimed that Laura Loomer was furious that neoconservatives had slipped through the vetting process for administration jobs, referring to foreign policy views commonly associated with the Bush administration. All right, now to give us more details on this, we're joined on this broadcast by our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who's joining us with more details from New York. Now, Susan, this is an interesting bit of a controversy. Tell us a bit about who this individual, Laura Loomer, actually is, and does she wield enough clout that she can have a conversation with the president and he'll sack 6 people from the NSC?
So, yeah, I love that question because, you know, the mainstream media has been trying to attack Laura Loomer for some time now. And it always seems like she's an investigative journalist. She's been very vocal about her support for Donald Trump. She hasn't so much gained anything from this support, but apparently she was at a meeting yesterday and she had an opportunity to call with her president, talk with President Donald Trump. As you heard, the president said that he doesn't really directly take her recommendations. He also said that she talks a lot, but nonetheless, she's one of those soldiers of President Donald Trump. Now, to, you know, make her this decision-making figure is a little over the top, but nonetheless, there is a story here. And the story is that the Trump administration has decided to fire these individuals because they don't align with the America First policy. Now, while other presidents do this because they want to be in line with their policies, when Donald Trump does it and when he does it now, which is after that Signal scandal, and then, you know, with everything that was happening at the Defense Department and whatnot, you know, the attention on this becomes bigger and bigger.
Interesting. We'll have to see as to how this unfolds. Thanks to you very much, Susan Tehrani, for joining us with those details then.
Thank you.
All right, let's now shift our attention to the other big story from the United States, where Donald Trump and also his administration, remember, have tried to downplay the Yemen attacks group chat saga as a closed case. But the Signalgate scandal refuses to die down. The US Defense Secretary is now in the spotlight for the investigation in this unprecedented security lapse. Now, what is interesting is this. Pete Hegseth, as the Defense Secretary, is the head of the Pentagon. And now the Pentagon will investigate the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, for using the Signal messaging app to discuss sensitive information about military operations. The probe will be conducted by the Inspector General of the Department of Defense. A memo from the Acting Inspector General, Stephen Stebbins, has said that the probe will evaluate the extent to which Pete Hegseth and other defense personnel had complied with policies and procedures for the use of a commercial messaging application for official business. They'll also review compliance with classification and records retention requirements. The investigation came in response to a request from the top two members of the Senate Armed Services Committee. The Atlantic magazine revealed last week that its editor-in-chief, Jeffrey Goldberg, was inadvertently included in the Signal chat in which officials including Hegseth and the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz had discussed the strikes against the Houthis in Yemen. When asked about the probe that was initiated against his Secretary of Defense, President Trump again downplayed the development, calling it a wasted story.
Hegseth in this IG investigation. Do you want to weigh in on that?
What is it?
There's an IG investigation into the Secretary of Defense's use of the Signal app.
Oh, is that you bringing that up again? Don't bring that up again. Your editors probably. That's such a wasted story.
A U.S. judge has ordered the Trump administration last week to preserve all Signal communication between the 11th till the 15th March. The dates, in fact, cover the period when Waltz had set up the chat and mistakenly added Goldberg, and the day of the deadly U.S. airstrikes on the Iran-backed Houthis. All right, now to give us more perspective on this, we are joined in this broadcast by retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, who is a military expert and is joining us live on this show, all the way from Virginia in the United States. Now, Colonel Davis, this is a very significant matter. There is now going to be a probe against Pete Hegseth by the Pentagon, but the head of the Pentagon is Pete Hegseth himself. How is this even going to work out? Does this not go contrary to the laws of natural justice? He cannot be the judge in a case where he's also the accused.
Well, that's one of the reasons that we have the Inspector General system itself, really throughout the government, but definitely in the U.S. military, is that the Inspector General is supposed to be outside of the pressure from the commander of the organization, in this case, the Secretary of Defense. So he's supposed to be free from any kind of influence with that. That's so that we can look openly at anyone in the organization. That's the theory. We'll see how it's going to work in progress, because when you take a look at all of those text messages, not just the one that happened at the time of the strike, but the ones going back several days before that, it's pretty hard to make a case that that's not classified information, but we'll have to see how the probe works out, I suppose.
And also considering the manner in which Pete Hegseth has conducted himself ever since he's taken charge as the Defense Secretary, there are reports that he's taken his wife to many of these high security meetings, etc. Is there a possible sort of a buzz that probably Pete Hegseth is not taking his job seriously enough, considering the sensitive nature of his job?
We only see bits and pieces. I honestly can't talk about the issue about his wife going out. I don't know if that's a confirmed situation, if she was actually in on classified, or if it was just some other meeting. I just don't have enough information to talk about that part. But the things that we see illuminated in that text message string, etc., he's taking it seriously. Just what the question is, should he have been taken seriously on a different platform, i.e. the high side, they call it, the classified system? That seems to be the biggest issue.
All right, we'll have to leave there. Thank you very much indeed, Colonel Davis, for joining us with that perspective there.
Thank you.
So the countdown has begun to the snap elections in Canada, but the polls have been overshadowed by America's reciprocal tariffs. Now, the opposition is using the trade war to corner the ruling party. The Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, has criticized Prime Minister Mark Carney's response to the recent U.S. tariffs that have been imposed by Donald Trump. Now, President Trump announced sweeping tariffs, including a 25% levy on Canadian automobiles. In retaliation, the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has declared that Canada will impose a 25% tariff on US vehicles that do not comply with the Continental Free Trade Agreement. Now, Pierre Poilievre has criticized Mark Carney's approach, labeling it to be pretty weak, and asserting that Carney's liberal policies will keep Canada vulnerable to US trade pressures. He's further accused Carney of lacking the resolve to stand up against US tariffs, warning that under a liberal leadership, Canada will become increasingly susceptible to American trade pressure.
The only difference between Trudeau and his economic advisor is the fact that Mark Carney is weaker and more out of touch, totally conflicted with millions of dollars invested in things that go against Canada's national interest. We must reject, up until just a few months ago, he had 3 different passports, was calling himself a European, moved his headquarters to New York, killing jobs and opportunity in Canada.
Now, despite the attacks by the opposition, the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has maintained that his country will fight Trump's tariffs with force.
Well, this is a tragedy. It is also the new reality. We must respond with both purpose and force.
Now, this escalating trade dispute has already impacted the Canadian auto industry, with Stellantis temporarily shutting down its Windsor assembly plant, affecting well over 3,500 workers in less than 4 weeks. Canada will hold a critical election. The question, of course, is this: will the tariff war dominate the election issues for the voters? Now, Denmark and Greenland's leaders are touring the Arctic waters in a show of unity, a direct response to Trump's interest in buying Greenland. Take a look. Senegal's President Bassirou Diomaye, in his annual State of the Nation speech, has issued a stark warning about the country's financial situation. The President Faye said that sacrifices are necessary to address the challenges ahead, further stressing on the need for a collective effort to rectify the financial issues.
The state of our country's public finances, as revealed by the audit, requires us to first rely on ourselves to turn the situation around. We are fully capable of doing so, and we will succeed with everyone's commitment and mobilization.
Now, these remarks follow reports from the authorities and also the International Monetary Fund that the previous administration had underestimated the nation's debt levels. Now, according to Senegal's financial watchdog, the debt now exceeds 99% of the GDP, which is far higher than the earlier figures. While the 2023 budget deficit was reported at 12.3% of the GDP compared to the prior government's claim of 4.9%. Now, social tensions have risen in recent months in Senegal as economic growth has slowed down due to weaker activity in sectors such as mining, construction and the agro-industry. Now, thousands of people from the minority Muslim community across India joined a nationwide protest against the Waqf Amendment Bill that was passed yesterday. Now, the Waqf Amendment Bill proposes sweeping changes in the management of land that has been set aside for use by the Muslim community. On Thursday, the upper house of the parliament approved the bill after a pretty lengthy 13-hour debate. The provisions of the contentious bill have triggered protests in cities such as Kolkata, Chennai, Ahmedabad and several others. Political parties that are leading the demonstrations in many places have vowed to mount a legal challenge against this controversial bill that has been passed. The Congress party has said that it will move the Supreme Court to decide the constitutionality of this contentious bill. Now, during the discussion in the Rajya Sabha, the opposition party strongly objected to the bill and have termed it to be anti-Muslim and unconstitutional. Now, the opposition India bloc ally, the Samajwadi Party, called the passing of the bill an effort to disturb the communal harmony in the country.
The Waqf bill was passed in a very arbitrary manner. Attempts are being made to disturb harmony in the country. The government is eyeing Waqf properties. They want to take Waqf land and give it to industrialists.
Now, this bill also has been opposed by the People's Democratic Party, the PDP chief Mehbooba Mufti, who said that the passing of this kind of a bill is against the political fabric of this nation.
This should not happen. This is an institution of minorities and Muslims, and to bulldoze it like this and pass it in the parliament, I believe, amounts to robbery, which is very wrong and should not happen.
But the government has termed the bill to be a historic reform that will benefit the minority community. The Rajya Sabha passed the bill with 128 members voting in favour and 95 opposed to it. The lower house Lok Sabha passed it on Thursday with 288 members supporting it and 232 against it. Now, praising the passage of this bill, the Indian Prime Minister called it a watershed moment in the country's quest for socio-economic justice, transparency and inclusive growth. Now, the Indian Prime Minister, who is currently on a visit to Thailand and Sri Lanka, said that the new legislation will particularly help those who have long remained on the margins. The bill now awaits the presidential assent before it can become an act.
प्रस्ताव स्वीकृत हुआ और विधेयक यथा संशोधित पारित हुआ। लॉबी खोल दी है पक्ष में 288, विपक्ष में 232। प्रस्ताव स्वीकृत हुआ और विधेयक।
In Nepal, supporters of the former king Gyanendra Shah have started a crowdfunding campaign. The funds are meant to help Gyanendra Shah pay off a penalty of 8 lakh Nepali rupees that was imposed on him by the Kathmandu metropolitan city. So far, the funding campaign has collected nearly 4.5 Nepali rupees. In donation, the campaign itself was started by a recently dismissed government-appointed tourism promoter for publicly backing the former monarch. Gyanendra Shah was penalized for the damage that was caused to the public property during a pro-monarchy protest that was held in central Kathmandu last week. Just a week ago, thousands of supporters of the former king Gyanendra Shah gathered at the eastern edge of Kathmandu on Friday for a rally that was organized by different groups. That was meant to be a peace rally, but trouble began when the protesters in a white pickup drove towards a police barricade, colliding with several officers. The police then resorted to firing tear gas shells and spraying water cannons on the protesters. Several buildings and vehicles were also vandalized in the clashes. The police arrested more than 100 protesters so far. Nepal's ruling coalition has called for the arrest of the former king Gyanendra Shah after 2 supporters and a journalist were killed in the clashes on the streets of Kathmandu last Friday. In 2008, Nepal, remember, had transitioned into a secular and a federal democratic republic through a parliamentary declaration that had abolished the 240-year-old monarchy. But dissatisfaction over political instability, corruption and slow economic development prevails. Nepal has seen a rise in support for the restoration of the monarchy and also for Nepal to again be declared a Hindu state. With political divisions deepening, Nepal continues to witness intense debates over its future governance. And with that, is a wrap on this edition of Race to Power. This is Mohammed Saleh signing off. Thanks for watching.
The Earth is sending distress signals. Wildfires, droughts, and melting glaciers. Can we reverse the damage? Explore the harrowing effects of climate change. It's a wake-up call. Global emergency. Climate Tracker on WION World is One.
This week on Tech It Out, we show you how drones are helping fight the battle against wildfires. We also introduce you to Rome's first robotic employee.
I'm here to help.
And we tell you about the latest fitness innovation. This and more on WION.